I watched 3 videos about racism. The first video was called The Mind of White America. The second video I watched was Whitney Down on Whiteness Project. The last video I watched was called Mirrors of Privilege. The first video, The Mind of White America, there were a couple different people that said what they thought about racism. One thing that those people had said was, I don't think about race because I don't talk about it. I think this is true. If people stopped talking about race so much, I think people wouldn't think about it too much. Another thing that they said was modern society is so worried about preventing the problem that is all they talk about, which fuels the problem. So if we want to get rid of racism, stop talking about racism. I agree with this. I think that talking about racism is fueling the problem. Another thing they said was we can stop talking about it if we stop seeing each other as objects and start seeing each other as people and loving each other more and not judging so harshly. I agree with this. I think that everyone should see each other as a human being that is loving and to stop judging people so quickly without even knowing them because their appearance doesn't define the person that they are. Another thing that they said was everything is made into a racist something now. They don't start out as race problems, but they become race problems. I think this is so true. I feel like everything has ended up turning into a race problem, even if it wasn't to begin with, and it shouldn't be that way. The last thing that I wrote down that I thought was important that they said is, it is important to love one another and be accepting to each other and that we are all different and need to get over it. I also agree with this. Everyone needs to show love and acceptance towards everyone no matter what. The second video we watched was Whitney Down on Whiteness Project. This video was a guy talking about racism to another guy. He said some things that I thought were interesting. One thing he said was, not that I didn't think about that I had a racial identity, but he didn't really investigate how my race impacted me every moment of every day. When I think about this, I never really thought about how it impacted my every moment every day either. Another thing that was said was white people want to be thought of as an individual and not thought of as part of a group, and your individual experience is reflected in this broader social construct. I think this is true. I think that white people want to be individuals because a lot of white people think differently, but people of color want to be grouped together and stand up for what they believe. Another thing that was said was Buffalo had a main street which divided the black part of the city and the white part of the city. I think this is sad that they had a street that divided people. It doesn't make sense to me on why they needed a divider between them. Another thing that was said was the age of death is declining among middle-aged white men. I'm not really sure why this was happening, but I thought it was interesting. The last thing that was said was white people think that their individual experience is representational of something broader. I agree with this. The last video I watched was Mirrors of Privilege. In this video was also a bunch of different people talking about racism. One thing that was said was, what gets hidden is our fear, what gets hidden is our guilt. I think that this is sad that they felt like they had to hide their fear and guilt. Another thing that was said was this country was built on the backs of indigenous people, on the backs of slaves, on the backs of Chinese labor, and we see the pattern continuing today. I think that this is really sad. Another thing that was said was you can see it most when you watch the 4th of July parades. Confederate flags will appear in the Boy Scout troops. I never knew that Boy Scouts would appear with Confederate flags on the 4th of July, but that is so sad that they're doing that, and they're usually young kids. Another thing that was said was I never saw African American people. They lived in a different part of town, rode a different bus, went to different schools. The only time I ever saw anybody of color is when we went over to St. Paul's West Side by Shoes and looked inside their church and saw how different it looked to the church I went to. I think that this is sad and crazy that she never saw African American people because they were so separated. The last thing that was said that I think is the saddest one is his parents spoke in racist ways, used the N-word often, but he didn't know what it meant, but what he got from it was he was supposed to stay away from people of color because they were going to take something from me or hurt me in some way. This is sad because as a young kid, all you know is what your parents and family teach you and tell you. Then the fact that this guy's parents made him feel as though black people were a threat, which is very sad.